Hey everyone, I just wanted to do a quick video showing how I made some custom wheel center caps for my Honda using some 3D printed designs, a little bit of chrome vinyl, and some UV cure clear resin. First of all, to go over the 3D printed components, I printed the base with the clips out of ASA. It has a bit more heat resistance, which is probably good near the brakes. And then it also has kind of a matte finish, which is nice. And then I printed the center part of it in PETG because of its resistance to UV light in terms of color fading and brittleness. And then also I wanted to put the Honda logo in it, so I cut it out for one layer of printing, which is just enough to give me a shadow of an outline of where I need to put the vinyl decal. And I opted to make these two separate pieces, in part because it was much faster to print as two separate pieces rather than a single piece with many color changes. But also in my designs, I, for whatever reason, prefer to avoid having to use support material as much as possible. So if I can redesign something in such a way that I don't need to use any support material, that's ideal. And because these centerpieces are slightly recessed past the lip of this clip piece, it would have needed to have a lot of support material over the whole center part in order to not be super stringy. And I just thought that wouldn't look as good, especially when the support material is cleaned off, and printing it upside down or in this orientation, there would just need to be more support material, and it just didn't make sense. So I printed it in two pieces, and I printed it with a bevel on this piece and a corresponding bevel in here, as well as a bit of a lip. And so these two pieces actually really nicely snap together. And I did that to have some kind of mechanical connection between them, like a mechanical way that they are held together, not just using the epoxy. And then of course this has just a little bit of a lip on it, which will be used to keep the epoxy within the bounds of this ring, and then also just give it a little bit of thickness, and then also provide a little bit of space for the epoxy to grab onto both the outer ring and the inner ring and hold it all together really nicely. So these two pieces just snap together, and then I'm going to use an alcohol wipe just to get rid of any fingerprints or oils from my fingers or whatever else. And then let these dry a bit. The next step is I have some of this chrome vinyl left over from when I did the work on the hot rod axle. I use this in favor of re-chroming the axle or painting it. I use this vinyl to wrap the part that I welded, and I'll put a link to the video in the description to that video where I use this. And it's not perfect, but at a glance it's pretty good, and it saved me from having to re-chrome the bumper or get a new bumper or paint it or whatever else. So this is left over from that, and it's actually a bit nicer than what it looks like because it has a clear plastic protective film on it. So when that gets peeled off, it's actually a pretty convincing surface finish. So the next step is going to be peel off one of these logos. And like I said, I cut out the logo for one layer, so it's almost flat, but it lets me know where I need to put this decal, and I can just stick that in place and then use something like a X-Acto knife to peel off the clear layer and this extra piece that I don't know why it's there, but it's there. So now this one is ready for the epoxy, and again just give that, make sure that's stuck down, and then give that a quick wipe, and then do the same on the other one. And I'm only doing 2 in this video because I've already done 2, so I only need to do 2 more. And this goes, and again, that extra layer wasn't necessarily needed. It just made it really easy to get the chrome part perfectly centered and right where I want it, to already know where I'm trying to get it. And then pull the plastic off and give it one final wipe down with an alcohol cloth. So now these two are basically ready to go. The resin that I'm using is this Let's Resin UV resin. It's high viscosity, so it will form sort of a bubble rather than pour over the edges if it ends up getting a little bit too tall. And it's nice because it's single part, you don't have to mix it. It's really fast curing, like 5 minutes, low odor, and then it is crystal clear. And I also am using their Let's Resin brand UV curing light. So now the next step is to put the epoxy on the finish, or on the parts, and I'm just going to carefully fill up this space, and I don't have to be too careful about filling in all the gaps because it does have a self-leveling component that after a few minutes it will level out, and really the finish ends up being quite smooth. And I might need to add a little bit more in a couple of spots, but for the most part that will level out. So I'm just going to give it a few minutes to settle. And I might need to put a little bit more in this one, just so it gets all the way to the edges. This one actually looks pretty good, but I'm going to put just a little bit extra in it. And then now that it's pretty well settled, I'm going to use a creme brulee torch just to pop the bubbles a little bit. So just throw some light heat over it, let the bubbles come to the surface, and I don't want to apply too much heat because I don't want to end up having the heat affect either the parts or the vinyl underneath or even the epoxy, but I do want to make sure that it's as clear as possible. So I'm just going to give this a couple of cycles of let it sit for a minute, run over it quickly with the torch to get rid of any bubbles, let it sit for a minute, and maybe do that a couple of times. Just to, like I said, get the finish as nice as possible. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. So at this point, I'm going to cover it in the UV curing light, and it has a few settings on the top. It has 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and 5 minutes. I'm going to set it, there's a very little light that shows how many minutes you're setting it for. So I'm going to set it for 5 minutes and let that cure. So the 5 minutes is up. Annoyingly, bugs, I guess, like the UV light, so if you're doing this out in your garage like I am, be aware that bugs might want to crawl into your resin. And this is now fully cured. I can touch it. It's completely solid, and it has a really nice sort of depth type finish. And if you notice, the red part was actually face down on the textured bed of the 3D printer, so it had the same texture as the edge of this black part, but because the epoxy, I guess, is clear and thick enough, it filled it in, making it look totally glossy. So this is now fully cured. This piece is solid. The red part is not going to pop out at all, and it makes for a with the chrome vinyl, it makes for a pretty convincing wheel insert. And so let's install it in the wheel. So the whole reason for this project is I bought these wheels used, and they only came with 3 center caps. One of them was missing, so I needed to replace it anyway. And those center caps were quite ugly. I think these are much nicer looking and fit the car a lot better. And so to install them, you just have to put it sort of in place, and of course the hardest one is the one I'm doing on camera. It just snaps in, and that's it. Now it looks super good, and it's a really neat way to make some cheap custom center caps with any design that you really want. And yeah, so this was a quick video. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll put the links to everything that I used in the description. If you have any questions or suggestions, comment them below. Hit the like and subscribe button, and thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.